And so like when it comes to self-regulation, can you maybe define what it is and maybe what's the difference between like self-regulation and self-control?
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if we have the same book, by the way. I've got the Handbook of Self-Regulation by Bowmaster and all. Don't know if
Yeah,
that's
I
what you've
think I have
got
the
as
same
your
one,
book. Yeah.
probably.
Um, so let me start with the distinction between self-regulation and self-control, because I think that's interesting. The way I see self-control is more like self-discipline. So it is being able to exert a will over your, task, and therefore control your behavior, right? Um, the way I see self-regulation in comparison to that is that you it includes, and the definition does include self-control. So people who have higher levels of self-control do have higher levels of self-regulation, but there's a recognition that control alone can get depleted, and so you actually want you want the ability to regulate all aspects of your emotional, your attentional, and your you could probably say other states as well, physical states as well. And so there's more flexibility in actually then sort of managing your state so that you can achieve your outcomes. And so if I was to give a real life example, um, if I was talking about, say, not using your phone, let's talk about the digital. So if I've got my phone in front of me and I just sort of say nope, don't use it, and I keep working, I'm exerting self-control, right? If I say, actually no, I want to start to regulate myself around this, I would say, okay, so I'm noticing there is a need for me to pick up my phone here. I'm feeling bored with my work. I want an easy fix. I'm aware of that. Okay, what else can meet that need? Maybe I can go for a walk. How else can I meet that need? And I can actually then, not deplete myself. Whereas if if I keep repressing that emotion, eventually when the tray of sweets comes along, I'll be like, give me all of them, because I've used up my willpower,
I was
basically.
about to ask you, where
So
does the willpower come in this equation?
yes, and so I put self-control, self-discipline, and willpower all in one camp. Yeah, and they're not bad, like they're great things, right? And they're a limited resource, and you probably are very aware of ego depletion, right?
Yeah.
And that depleting effect, and these things can be depleted. Self-regulation is more of a muscle. It incorporates those things, but it's also more flexible. Kind of it is about working with your systems and uh, like addressing your different needs so that you can then manage them. The other thing about self-regulation is that you can build that muscle up, right? So there are lots of studies, academic studies, which show different activities which just over time build your self-regulation. Funny things like exercise is an obvious one, but other funny ones like checking your posture has been correlated with increasing your self-regulation, because you're building awareness, and then you are starting to do more self-monitoring, because self-monitoring is part of the self-regulatory process.
I was also
So
reading like two
now
things.
I'm very open because I know this is an area of interest to you, and so you might say, well, that's funny, but I read this. And I'm open to that because actually I was researching this in a lot of depth probably last year,
Yeah.
and so I may well have missed something there, and I'd be open to
Yeah,
being
I was about
challenged
to
on
ask you. I read in a book, which was for me, it makes sense, but also it was interesting. One thing was that in that book, it was more about willpower and how you can train that willpower as a muscle. Pretty much like similar concept. And one thing was meditation, even if it's like 5 minutes a day, which makes sense because you're becoming aware of your thoughts and you can learn to control your thoughts. Then you can learn to control yourself as well with time. But another one that I found really interesting was like 5 minute relaxation at the end of the day, where you just relax for like 5 minutes. I don't remember exactly what was the explanation behind it, but I'm really curious on your thoughts about if it's something that you would agree or not, if you have read any like science behind it, because for me it was like, wow, I didn't I I like to connect the dots, and in that moment I don't think I was fully able to connect the dots specifically to this one.
Yeah. Well, I think it's good to go back to some of the definitions, and I may or may not answer your question, so let me know. Mindfulness has also been defined as the regulation of attention, right? Because mindfulness is not about controlling your attention.
Yeah.
So it's actually about by regulating your attention in mindfulness, you're not everywhere, you're not too broad, and you're also not completely focused. It's a regulated thing, and this is why I love the word regulation, because it's actually about a continual rebalancing that is happening. So when I looked into self-regulation and mindfulness, I was very interested in how closely the two definitions, at one point I was making the argument that they were almost being defined as the same thing. It's just that self-regulation probably happens over a longer period of time than mindfulness, and mindfulness is more focused on attention than necessarily your emotional regulation, which is another component of self-regulation. So I just think it's nice to start there and think about that definition of regulation of attention, self-regulation, and mindfulness. To me, they are all related. And I can totally see, because self-control is one component of self-regulation, I can totally see how that would be strengthened through the practice of meditation. And I guess the question is, control is great, the ability to control our thinking, but at some point that will limit, at some point your ability to control will reach a limit. Whereas if you're able to regulate yourself, it's almost like you can flap in the wind and and be resilient. Whereas if you're having to control, at some point the dam will burst, and that's how I think of the two things differently.
So with the regulation, is it, I don't want to ask if it's like a limited resource, but like the way you explained it, it sounds like when it comes to self-control, you in a way really restrict yourself until you break. But with self-regulation, it's like more flexible in that way.
Yeah. And because self-regulation includes emotional regulation, attentional regulation, and I've also seen definitions that include like our physiological regulation, because our body is in a constant state of regulation as well, with the hormone systems, temperature as well. There are so many aspects of regulation going on just to kind of maintain an equilibrium. And so yeah,